So you got grades going up, ACT scores going down, and that is a shocking thing. Post-pandemic, chronic absenteeism doubled in many states. It's a huge funding issue. If we're not getting students to school, it's impacting school funding, which is impacting staffing. It's also a contributor to dropout rates. How about we start with what's going on? Welcome to From Classroom to Campus, the podcast where we have open, insightful conversations about the ever-evolving world of education. Our mission is simple: to shine a light on the incredible work happening in schools and the passionate educators, leaders, and students who make it all possible. As a parent and a former educator, it's a privilege to sit down with those who have dedicated their lives to supporting students and shaping the future. But today I am flying solo. No guest, just a few stories, some compelling data, and a handful of ideas that might make you text a friend or walk into work tomorrow saying, "Hey, I heard this podcast and it really got me thinking." Well, I'm not exactly totally solo, actually. My wonderful producer, Megan Blessing, is here, and she's going to help to keep me in line and maybe chime in a little bit. So hello, Megan.
Hello, Philip.
Good to see you. I also want to talk a little bit about why we started this podcast. This podcast is unbelievably important to me. And, my motivation, the team's motivation, was to talk about the amazing things going on in education. And I think what drove us to commit to this and to give you guys fantastic content about education is because you hear so many negative things. And whether it's a headline or something you hear, it's just not fair to education. It's not fair to all those wonderful people who have committed their lives to education, because they're doing incredible, incredible things. And they're doing it every single day. And they're not doing it for pay. They're not doing it for fame. They're doing it because they genuinely love to teach and they genuinely love students. They love to see students grow. So that's why we're here. That's why we do this. And that's why it's important to us. So what we typically do when I have guests on is we start out with a little game called Hook, Line, and Thinker. And since I am the guest and it gives you guys a little opportunity to get to know me a little bit better, I am going to play the game myself. So I will reach into the Hook, Line, and Thinker jar. And my first question, do you have a favorite quote? I am a big quote guy. I love the quote. And yes, I've got a quote I heard recently that I've been telling a bunch of people and probably driving people nuts about, but I love it so much. And it's by a guy named Jose Andres. He's a famous chef, and I'll maybe talk about him in a second. But he said, life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. And I love that quote. And, Jose, like I said, famous chef, he's the guy, you maybe have heard of him, maybe didn't know his name, but he's the gentleman who goes out to Puerto Rico when they have a horrible hurricane or when they have the horrible fires in California. He shows up with a crew to feed people, to feed first responders, to feed people who lost their home, to reach out to people. And he's got this incredible heart. He also has all these fantastic Michelin star restaurants, which is very cool too. But what I love about the guy, and I think what is great about the quote, is he stretches himself and he gets out of his comfort zone and he does things to not only improve himself, but more importantly, to help and improve society. And that at the edge of your comfort zone, man, that's where the magic happens, when you're a little bit nervous, when you're a little bit anxious, when you're not quite sure. So, for teachers, man, they're always, I think, right at the edge of their comfort zone because they're pushing themselves to be better. And that's what every great educator does. And I think that's what every great, person tries to do, is do that next big thing that's going to kind of inspire others, but more importantly, make them better and help them learn from others. Another quote real quick is something my dad told me a long time ago. So my dad was in the Army for 20 years. He retired as lieutenant colonel. A lot of leadership experience. And when I first got my first principal job, I was 27. And man, really was looking for some guidance, really looking for some help from the people I knew around me, my mentors, the folks that really I trusted to give me good leadership advice. And I asked him for some advice one time, and he told me this. He said, there are 3 types of problems out there. There's problems that you've got to solve. There's problems that you've got to help other people solve. And there are problems that solve themselves. And what that meant to me at the time was I can't go around and solve all my teachers' problems. I can't go around and fix everything. That sometimes I need to encourage others to do that, or sometimes I just needed to kind of let that problem solve itself. So I appreciated that advice from my dad. I've told that to a lot of people, since then. So there's a couple quotes. All right, next question here. Let's see. Okay, what is your superpower? So I'm a firm believer that everybody has a superpower. It absolutely, some people have lots of superpowers. I happen to have one superpower. And my wife would agree with this one. My superpower is I do not stink. And Megan, laughing over there.
Are you sure?
I do not stink. And here's a good example of that. A lot of people go and work out. And like when you had your kids go out to recess and they come inside and you'd be like, ooh, you smell like outside. I don't ever smell like outside. I don't ever stink. And it's a good thing because I would say my wife's superpower is she's got like a superpower of like this great sense of smell. So maybe that's why we got together is she can smell really well and I don't stink. So that is my funny superpower that you now know of.
I don't know if I believe that. I think
trust
we
me.
need to do a stink test.
We're not going to do a stink test. Maybe in future podcasts we'll do it. We'll do a little stink test. All right. So let's talk about our show title today. So our show title, and it's hopefully something I'll do a bunch of future episodes on. It is Things in Education That Make You Go, And if you heard that title and you went, okay, I'm a child of the 90s. I grew up in the 90s, and there was a wonderful band, CNC Music Factory, that came up with that song, Things That Make You Go, Well, this is just our version of that. It's education version of things that make you go, So these are interesting things in education that are kind of head scratchers, kind of things that you talk to your friends about, you talk to your colleagues about, and they're just unique to maybe education and things that kind of make you scratch your head a little bit. So we're going to explore a couple of those topics today, but I'm looking forward to you giving me future topics. So I would love for you to suggest topics. I would love for you to, put in the comments what you might want to hear about. That would be really important to me because there's probably things out there in education that make you go, And on top of that, I would love to know if there's a guest out there that you really think I should have my podcast because they are just this incredible person. There's an expert in education, this specific thing, or maybe they're just an incredible educator and you think I should have them on. And that person might even be you. So if that's you and you want to join my podcast and hop on and we have a good time together, then email me. We'll put the email down in the description of the podcast and you can shoot us a message and maybe we'll have you on. All right. So with that said, I'm going to talk to you about the story that kind of inspired our first topic today. I've got a good friend and their daughter just had to do a Saturday school. And if you guys don't know what Saturday school in high school is, it's certainly something you don't want to do if you're a high school student. It means you're in trouble, or in this case, you have missed too much school. And this individual had missed too much school. She had missed more than 10% of the school days, 10% of that particular class. And so she had to come to Saturday school to make up those hours. And what was frustrating to the parent I was talking to about this is their daughter has a B in the class. Their daughter has been doing well in the class, but she still had to basically go to Saturday school and stare at the wall and not do a whole lot. But that was critical because if not, she was not going to get credit for that particular course. So we're going to talk about compulsory attendance, and we're also going to talk about absenteeism because those things kind of go together. So compulsory attendance is essentially you've got to be in that particular class 90% of the time or you don't get credit. It's that simple. Doesn't matter if you have an A in the class, doesn't matter what you have in the class, you also have to have the attendance in there. And then absenteeism is essentially defined as a student who is missing more than 10% of the school days. And so they go together, and it's what I thought we should dive in, and it's something in education a lot of people kind of go, about. So let's talk about the data. I got some data for you guys. According to the U.S. Department of Education, you can find this data actually a lot of places, but I found it there. Pre-pandemic, so we're talking about the school year of 2018, 2019, roughly 15% of all students were chronically absent. And of course, chronically absent means what, Megan? Absent more than?
10%.
10%. Nice job. Nice job. You're listening. I appreciate that. In high school, those rates were actually a little bit higher. So in high school during that year, they were more around 20%. And if you know a high school student, and if you work with high school students, you know that keeping high school kids going to class is hard. They also have cars, which, they take matters into their own hands at times. So a little bit higher in high school, but those numbers look pretty good. Pre-pandemic, they look pretty good. Not horrible. We're doing fine. We know what happened during the pandemic. I don't think we need to, I don't think people want to reminisce about what happened in the pandemic, but we certainly know what happened in education. We shut down schools. We had crazy different attendance things. They took attendance in very interesting ways. So that was, during the pandemic. Then what we saw is a very interesting thing that we call the post-pandemic surge. That was 2021, 2022. Chronic absenteeism doubled in many states. I'm going to give you some regional numbers in a second, but overall, they doubled essentially. The national average rose from 28 to 30% overall. And obviously, high schools were hit the hardest. Some districts reporting 40 to 50% of students that were chronically absent. And then your urban areas, your schools that were serving low-income populations saw gigantic spikes. Very much newsworthy stuff. You probably saw it in the news. So what happened during the pandemic that caused that post-pandemic surge? Well, if you dive right in, you're going to see things like students are out of routine. You put a student in a situation where they're at home and they're deciding when they open up their Chromebook, they're deciding when they're engaging in school. They don't have specific routines, despite all the tremendous hard work that educators did. Well, that was an issue, getting them back into the flow of things. The other thing you had is, there was a time pre-pandemic when if the student had a fever and you're a working parent, okay, I'm going to pop 2 Tylenol into this wonderful child and send him off to school. I know my parents both worked, and that was a very common thing. If I had a fever, I woke up, and here's your Tylenol. You go to school, you'll be fine. Well, I think that hit a little bit differently after the pandemic, and I think the message to parents was, if they have a fever, you keep them home, and you keep them home 24 hours fever-free. And so I think, if I'm speculating, I think that also, played a part in people being absent more. More parents working from home. Certainly when a parent's working situation is different and they've got the flexibility, I think that lended itself to that post-pandemic surge. Youth sports, we'll talk about that a little bit more. That's been kind of a thing that's pulled kids out of schools. Technology and students being able to access their classroom or access what's going on in the classroom when they're not at school, that obviously led to a big surge. We had transportation things it's kind of still ongoing. We're struggling to find bus drivers. We're struggling to fill kind of those needs. And then, school lunch programs have been cut recently. And I think that has obviously hurt things as well. Recent data. So we're looking now at the 22-23, early reports in 2024 already. So now we're past this post-pandemic surge, and we're seeing some levels of recovery. But chronic absenteeism remains 25% nationally in most school districts. So you look at pre-pandemic, we're around 15%, maybe some high schools up at 20%, but now we're 25%, nationally, and even a little bit higher for high schools. So we're still not seeing that recovery. We're still not seeing what happened pre-pandemic, and that's an interesting thing to kind of look at, and we can kind of talk about that a little bit. In terms of regional data, I'm going to give you the regional data, and you can make whatever inference you would like. But I think there's some interesting things with the regional data. In New York City, over 40% of students chronically absent 21-22 school year. Slightly lower in 2023, but still above 30%. So New York City is still seeing a big issue with absenteeism. California, prior to pre-pandemic levels, about 12%. Now in 2022, they were above 30%. Texas, statewide chronic absenteeism reached above 20% post-pandemic. So it is higher, but it's not as crazy high as we're seeing in some other parts of the country. And then Washington, D.C., they've got places in Washington, D.C. currently now that have 45%, it says, of high school students, still missing significant amounts of school. So, and still being kind of qualified as chronically absent. So let's talk about why this is an issue. there's a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons it's an issue. I would say, first off, if a student is absent, typically we see there's a red flag of some sort. Maybe they're being bullied. There's a red flag potentially because they're struggling with their mental health. So there's lots of things that are causing that, and lots of things for us to kind of be aware. And, absenteeism is a problem, and it's really a problem when you start looking at individual student reasons behind that. I think another huge problem is our wonderful teachers out there. Student is absent, student comes to class next day. What does that teacher really want to do? Well, that teacher wants to catch that student up. So it's not fair to that teacher to constantly be catching students up, and it's why absenteeism is one of the reasons it's a big issue. It's also not fair to the class, because that teacher's stopping down all the time to catch students up. Those students who are in class and are attending regularly, they're kind of getting the short end of the stick as well. So I think that's a big issue, and something that is a problem. In terms of funding, it's a huge issue. So anybody in education right now screaming, going, well, it's a funding issue. Yes, it's a huge funding issue. If we're not getting students to school, it's impacting school funding, which is impacting staffing and impacting a variety of different things. So those are the stuff that it's big. It's also a contributor to dropout rates. If you look at a high school and you look at your chronically absent students, their probability of dropping out is just skyrocketing. In terms of what we can do when we have a situation of high absenteeism, I'm going to kind of break it down into three different things. First of all, I believe it's about building a culture in your district, on your campus, that's very inviting and brings students to your campus. And when I was an elementary principal, we did some very unique things. We were in an area where we had a lot of Title I students. I would say a vast majority, if not all of our students, kind of fell in that category. And we did an assembly every single morning with like 600 kids. And people thought we were crazy. People are like, how are you bringing 600 kids into the cafeteria every single day and doing a school-wide assembly? That can't be done. Why would you even think about doing it? And our justification for doing it was simple. Our students came from really, really tough backgrounds, tough situations, and we wanted to make sure every day they started with this nice, calm, inviting message, this positive message. So if they were yelled at home, or they had a hard time getting to school, or things were stressful to them, we started their day off in the same way every single day. We built routines. We pulled what we called happies. So if we pulled your name and guess what? You were there that day, you were going to get something. You were going to come up on stage and we're going to give you a big round of applause and we're saying, hey, it's so great so great to have you here. And those students who were tardy, they're in the library. They're missing assembly. And that was an incentive to get to school on time, because assemblies are fun. They were exciting. We were doing cool stuff, that sort of thing. So we always were very complimentary of our students at assemblies. We recognized them. We did a lot of cool things. We built a lot of culture, built a lot of positive community. But it didn't start with that. I would say, and a lot of schools do a tremendous job about this, and I would encourage you to continue that effort or push that effort on your campus, and that is greeting students at the door. I don't care if you're in middle school. I don't care if you're at a high school. Greet students at the door. If you've got students getting dropped off in the morning by cars, man, we were always out there. Rain, shine, sleet, snow. We were out there opening car doors, making sure students got in the building. Most importantly, greeting them, telling them we were so happy to have them there. And it was fun. You open that door and it might be an interesting car that pulled up, and maybe some beer bottles from the night before fell out or something like that, and you just kind of tuck those back in the car and you close the door and you don't judge anybody and you say, hey, it's great to have you here. And I think that stuff's important. Junior highs and high schools, man, staff should be in that hallway. Administrators should be in that hallway. Counselors should be in that hallway. We had a rule when I was a junior high and high school principal that unless you were in like this intense ARD or this like intense meeting, when that bell rang, you got up and you paused that meeting and you went out into that hallway and you greeted students and you let them know, that you were happy to have them there, and you created this wonderful, positive environment. And I think things like that, it's not this like wonderful silver bullet's gonna fix all absenteeism, but I think that's a start. I really do. I feel really passionate about that. making sure from the junior high and high school level, you don't just have your traditional band, orchestra, sports. You're going to need some other things to pull kids in. You're going to need some other things that kids are interested in outside of just the academic stuff that make them want to be at school. Because if a student isn't feeling a part of the school, if a student doesn't have their people, their kind of tribe, they're really not going to want to come to school. So second thing is more of an individual student thing. And in education, I know we always talk about you've got to some degree, it's one student at a time. And I think if you've got chronically absent students, you really essentially need to go to and handle it a student at a time. And yeah, I could get a bunch of comments saying, well, that's not scalable. And how do we do that? You got to find a way. And you got to find a way for your counselors, your teachers, your admin to divide and conquer and go and find those students who aren't coming to school and sit down and don't just destroy them about how oh, you're ruining your future, you're not coming to school. How about we start with what's going on? What's going on in your life? What's going on at home? Please talk to me about what the situation is so I can help support you. Because just giving them a consequence and just diving into, how could they be so irresponsible? Don't you know how important school is? That's not going to work. But like I said, very difficult, challenging thing. We had a particular student, one day I was doing bus duty and kid pulls up and he actually is driving the car and he's like a sixth grader. And he gets out of the car and he goes around the side and he opens the minivan door and kids come out and they walk into school and then he goes and opens the passenger door and his dad gets out and he's got a back brace on and he walks around the school and he walks around the van and he gets in the driver's side and he drives off. And then the student waved to me and said, "Hey, Mr. Bates, how you doing?" and walks right in the school. And it took me, I'm not kidding, 3 or 4 minutes ago, did I just witness a sixth grader drive to school? And, in that moment, I might have gone crazy, but I went, this is super interesting, and I got to figure out what we can do to support this dad and make sure he's getting the healthcare he needs to drive his own child to school. So that's just a silly story, just kind of something that happened to me, but it kind of speaks to you got to find out what the situation is. What was so wild about that day is I think that day was so crazy. I don't think I really dealt with that till about 10 a.m. And you guys can probably all relate to that. When the craziest thing going on your campus is not the student driving to school who's in sixth grade, you've got certainly an interesting campus. So anyways, all right. So let's talk about the last thing. And the last piece, we talked about how schools can build a great culture and do all these great things. Talked about how we've got to go individually to students. And I think the last piece, it's a little sensitive. The last piece is making sure we have engaging classrooms. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that that is exceptionally hard to do, to make sure you've got this wonderful, engaging classroom, especially when you've got a million other distracting things like phones and laptops and a million other things going on. But if your classroom's not engaging, it's hard to get kids to come to your class and come to your school. And I had a long conversation with my son the other day that was really interesting, where I was asking him when I was kind of prepping for this and thinking about this kind of stuff and going, hey, what gets you to come to school? Certainly, he plays soccer, so he loves his soccer class. That gets him to come to school. But what else? And watching him kind of process through, well, Mr. So-and-so in my history class tells us these great stories and you never know what's going to come out of his mouth and it's really funny sometimes. And that's what I look forward to. I look forward to, my second period class. And I think if you survey your students and you really sit down and ask them, the ones that have an engaging classroom to go to, even doesn't have to be all their classes, probably won't be all their classes, but that gets them coming to school. It just frankly does. So, yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
All right, Megan, what you got?
So it sounds like it doesn't matter what your excuse is, like whether you have an actual excuse, like you're going to the orthodontist, or you are just not showing up for school. Like it doesn't matter. Like I think that's so strange.
It is. And this particular parent, kind of circling back to our scenario, their child was missing days for what we would all kind of think about as good reasons. She was modeling. Like she was going to cities and doing these cool modeling jobs, and that was awesome. She had braces, and so she missed a few days for being at the orthodontist. And you're still missing days. So you're still, if you allow everybody to excuse everything and it doesn't count towards that, ultimately you're not getting what's in class. But it is something that is difficult, which is probably a really good segue to kind of my next topic. So I appreciate you bringing it up. That was a really good thing to bring up, Megan. And that is, they've got data out now saying you're in class, you're meeting attendance requirements, but you're maybe not learning, or we're not measuring your learning as well as we could. And that is because of grade inflation. Imagine a high school classroom where teachers have the time and resources to create engaging lessons and where every student is on a path to success. What if this classroom could be a reality? UWorld's courses for AP and online preparation for the ACT and SAT exams give teachers the tools to save time while building confidence and ability. Teachers deserve resources designed to deepen understanding, promote retention, and make even the most complex subjects easy to grasp. Content created by teachers for teachers. Content that doesn't just inform, but inspires, filled with engaging visuals and interactive elements that spark curiosity and a love for learning. Because at UWorld, we believe education isn't just about getting into college. It's about unlocking a world of opportunities. Turn your what if into what's next. Discover why UWorld is the content teachers love and the success students deserve. Visit collegereadiness.uworld.com to learn more. Grade inflation is kind of the next topic I want to hit, because I really think that grade inflation is something that's plaguing everybody right now. And when I look at grade inflation, I'll give you some context around there. AP courses, man, we love AP courses. We certainly support them. I support them, and they are really the best indicator of success in college. SAT, they talk about the data from SAT and GPA. If you want to know the most for sure way you know your child is going to be successful in college, they take and pass an AP course and they pass the exam. And that's kind of the critical piece here, because you've got a lot of students that take AP courses and they're going, oh, I'm taking this AP course because I need the bump in my GPA. So if you didn't know that you take an AP course and you get a bump in your GPA as opposed to if you were in a regular course. And that's interesting and that's wonderful, especially for kids that are trying to play the GPA game, trying to play the class rank game, and they're gonna step in that AP course, and even if they get a C, it's gonna be bumped up to a B. And you'll hear a lot of people say, and I don't disagree with this, that taking an AP course and getting a B in an AP course is better than getting an A and maybe an on-level course, because you're pushing yourself, you're challenging yourself, going back to my quote of, right at the edge of your comfort zone. You want to do those type of things. But what we're seeing, and we're seeing at a staggering rate, and I'll hit some other data with you in a second, is you've got all these students who are making A's and B's in AP courses, and then they're taking their AP exams in May. And that AP exam is the only thing truly that gets in the college credit. You can get an A or B in an AP course, a C in an AP course, and that doesn't get you the college credit. You have to take that AP exam in May, and you have to score a 3, 4, or 5, to actually pass. And so you've got all these inflated grades, and all these students who have maybe A's and B's in their AP course, they take their AP exam and they just do a dismal on it. They get a 1, they get a 2, they struggle. And it's not because that student doesn't have a desire to pass their exam. It's because their grade has been inflated. And that grade isn't a really proper representation of what they knew and what they actually learned in that AP course. So that gives you a little bit of context around there. I'll go into some data, because I'm going to freak you out with one of these data points. Might not surprise you, but it might get your attention. That didn't make any sense. Might not surprise you, but might get your attention. Anyways.
I thought it made sense.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, so the big thing, GPA trends are rising really, really fast. This is a fact. On average, in the high school, GPAs increased from 3.17 in 2010 to 3.36 in 2021. That's nearly a 0.2 GPA increase in just over a decade. This is even as ACT scores have dropped. So you got grades going up, ACT scores going down. That'll tell you something. From 2010 to 2020, the percentage of students with GPAs 4.0 or higher nearly doubled. In contrast, SAT scores have remained flat and in a lot of cases have declined, especially in math. I did a speaking engagement recently. Everybody, and I was to a bunch of high school students, they all had 4.0s. Like, it was unbelievable how many students have a 4.0 or higher. And that's a problem. I mean, it really is, because I would guarantee you not every one of those students are getting 5s on all their AP exams. And I think that's something that we really need to address in education. So the data tells us grades are up, test scores are down. I'll reinforce that fact. In 2022, the ACT average composite score dropped to a 19.8. That is the lowest it's been in 30 years. That is a big deal. Meanwhile, more students than ever graduating with honors and above average GPA. So here's the stat that's going to really be interesting to you. Teachers feel, well, I'll give you the phrase first. Teachers feel pressured to inflate grades. Teachers are not just loving to toss out A's. That is not something teachers do. Teachers are wonderful. Educators are fantastic. They want to give grades that match what the student deserves. But according to EdWeek, they did a 2023 EdWeek research survey. 65% of teachers said they felt pressure from parents, administrators, or district policy to give higher grades than students earned. That's a staggering thing. More than half of teachers feel pressure when they're looking at their grade book to take that B and make it an A. And we're not talking like, the give them a point thing. We're not talking about the student is 1 point away from passing. And so the teacher goes, hey, you're contributing every day. You're always in my class. You're working really hard. I'm going to bump you up to passing the course. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, the overt pressure on teachers to give students higher grades than they actually deserve. And that's been a huge, huge issue, and it continues to be an issue. And I'm going to tell you too, it has a huge impact on college admissions. If you look at any research or talk to a college admission counselor, they will tell you that they are struggling to identify the correct students because they can't just look at GPA when everybody's got a higher GPA. And so they're having to come up with some very inventive ways on how to distinguish an apple from an orange and find those students they want to bring onto their campus. And I think that's a challenge. It also, and what are they doing? Well, they're looking at SAT scores heavily, ACT scores heavily. In fact, probably more than they would normally because of inflated GPAs. So it's something that at the college level, they're really working through and trying to get creative and really identify the student that's going to have success on their campus. So, all right. So let's talk about what can be done about grade inflation. It's tricky. I mean, I'm going to tell you, it's part society. It's part policy. We'll start with society a little bit. I don't think I'll hurt anybody's feelings out there, parents, but guess what? There is a whole lot of what we call helicopter parents out there. You've heard helicopter parents a lot, probably the last few years. It is a real thing. And what is a helicopter parent if you don't know? A helicopter parent is somebody who is watching their child from above and swooping in and taking care of things when they can, as much as they can, to make sure that their child has everything they need, even if they have to kind of take over that situation. Helicopter parents equate to students who are not ready for life, students who are not ready for the challenges of high school, students who are not ready for the challenges of college. Because guess what, mom and dad, you're not going to be there, or at least I really hope you're not there, for their first interview. And you're not going to be there to all these huge things going on in your child's life, and being that helicopter parent and swooping in and making sure their child doesn't experience any adversity is really not doing them any favors. I get it. It's hard. It's hard not to step in. It's hard not to just do it for them. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on homework with my child and just be like, it's late. We're tired. I'm just going to do these last couple for you. It's just a really common thing. We also have what we even see as worse, and that is snowplow parenting. Snowplow parenting is way worse than helicopter parenting. And, it's real simple. So what does a snowplower do? It gets the snow out of the way. What does a snowplow parent do? It gets challenges out of the way of their child. They literally step in and solve the problem or intervene and remove an obstacle from a child. And that might be they remove a consequence from the child. That might mean they step in and, battle royale with the school, with the teacher, with the district, and take over that situation. And even though maybe that child needs a nice learning moment there to grow, they remove that obstacle. And that is, I think, my opinion, even worse than the helicopter parent stuff, because you're really setting up your child for failure. So if you're around parents that maybe fall into those categories, or maybe you're a little bit that way or a little bit at times, some nice reflection, some nice, hey, maybe talk to your close, courageous friend who'll give you the truth on things. Am I being a snowplow parent here? Am I being a helicopter parent here? I think reflecting about that is really, really important. I know educators would really appreciate that, administrators especially. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any advice for educators that may be dealing
with the helicopter snowplow stuff?
Snowplow parents.
Yeah.
Any tips for them?
Yeah, I think it's really a big challenge, especially for your new educators. Because, when you go to educator school, when you go to college and they teach you how to be this great teacher, that's something that they aren't maybe directly, dealing with. And so my advice for teachers dealing with that, specifically you're a new teacher, is go find that wonderful veteran teacher that just seems to have it so together and they're so good at dealing with challenging parents, and have a conversation, get some pointers, talk to your administrators. But don't shy away from those conversations with parents. And I'm not saying be confrontational. Oh my gosh. Never be confrontational with a parent. When they're confrontational, that's when you just politely say, hey, it looks like this conversation's got heated. How about I talk to you later? Or, hey, next time let's meet with my administrator or a counselor, and then we can work through this together, because teachers and educators never deserve to be attacked. But you want to, in a very supportive way, talk to parents about other approaches or other things they can do, and just kind of caution them about, hey, it feels like you're kind of taking over in the situation, and we might be better served by letting our child do the productive struggle. So productive struggle.
You need to tell people what that is?
Educators, I love me some productive struggle. I think it is critical in life for students, for really any human, adult, any age, to experience productive struggle. And productive struggle is essentially the idea that as we struggle, we grow. And as we fail things or miss the mark on things, if we're reflective and if we have the proper attitude, that growth mindset, we will improve and we will get better. When you're talking to your children about productive struggle, or even a friend about productive struggle, I equate it to you're learning how to become a really good distance runner. And you go out there and you're like, all right, I'm gonna run a 10K. I've signed up for a 10K. Well, you're not gonna start running a 10K, obviously. You're gonna start running maybe to the end of the block. And then you're gonna push yourself and you're gonna run to the next block. And you're gonna continue to struggle, but as you struggle, you're gaining endurance. And as you struggle, you're learning to control your breathing, and you're learning to, hurt a little bit when you're running. So it's all those things that you're doing, to productively struggle, but it's productive because it's getting a little bit better each time. And I would say for students that have never experienced struggle, they're not gonna know how to push past a challenge. They're not gonna know how to deal with failure. They're not gonna know what to do when they're at that point in their life where things have gotten really hard. And so that's the big thing is I think it's appropriate for educators to talk to parents and students about what productive struggle means. And there's a science behind that. And I think science behind things is always great too. So, all right. So let's talk about the policy side of things. Boy, grading policy is really important in school districts and really important on campuses. It's important that every teacher understands the grading policy. It's important that that grading policy is clearly articulated to parents. It's important that grading policy has some level of standard basis, meaning that a student who is participating in class and is kind of nice and shows up every day, that's wonderful. We love all those things, but that doesn't get them a great grade. Having a standards-based grading policy where you actually have to, equate this particular grade to the knowledge is super important. And I think looking at policies, I struggle with the no zero policy, or essentially, minimum grade floor policies. I'll break that down for you. Yeah, if you're not an educator. So there's campuses that say, okay, even if the student does nothing, you got to give them a 50. You can't give them a 0, you got to give them a 50. And, I get it from the standpoint of if a student's got 3 or 4 zeros, mathematically, they're not recovering from that. There's no way to pass. But in the same regard, if you are really doing a situation where the student has done nothing all year or nothing all, 6 weeks, and they look at their grades and it's a 50 or a 60, that really doesn't tell the whole story, does it? So I think, grading policies and evaluating those, I think it's important that teachers are always consistent about grading policies, specifically in secondary, because what the English teacher does, if that's outlandishly different than what the math teacher does, boy, you talk about firing up some parents, that will do it right there. So being consistent with grading policies, I think is really, really important thing. And articulating that to parents, I think is important. So I'm not telling you what your grading policy should be. I think it's important to reflect on that. And I think it's important to educate not just your staff, not just your students, but your community on grading policy. I think reimagining report cards would be wonderful. We all get evaluated at work. And that evaluation system might be numbers based. So it might be, hey, you're a 4 out of 5 in this, or hey, you're a 3 out of 5 at this, or it might be words based, where you might be exceeds expectations in this, or meets expectations, et cetera. Anytime I've evaluated somebody, whether it be my current instructional team, that's fantastic and they do all this great work instructionally, or it was my teachers that do these incredible things in classrooms, that number or those words are only about 10% of the story. And that evaluation system is really more about sitting down that professional and having a wonderful discussion and conversation about what they're doing amazing in and where there might be some growth, and allowing them to ask questions and you ask reflective questions and really helping them move forward. Guys, it's the exact same thing for students. If you just give a grade and they just see a number there, what is that really telling them? And once again, I get it. It's the scalability of things. And, oh, you're telling me I got to sit down with every kid and have a 30-minute conversation about this, that, and the other. I'm not telling you that. I'm just telling you that if grades and numbers are the only thing you're doing to measure students and you're not having those other conversations with them and there's not another way to dialogue, we need to rethink report cards. And we need to really think, moving to some level of additional ways of measuring mastery and measuring what the student actually knows. So that's my thoughts on report card stuff. The other big thing is redos and test corrections. Oh my goodness. If a student fails a test and comes in the next day and does test corrections, and test corrections consisted of, hey, you picked B, now I need you to circle C, which is the right answer, and I need you to just tell me why it's right. That's not gonna do it. And I had a math teacher when I was an administrator, and I saw this math teacher do the best redo of test systems that I've ever seen. And essentially what this math teacher would do is they would record, he recorded some short videos on teaching some specific skills. And if the student failed a test, the student would have to go to the math teacher, ask permission to get access to those videos, watch those videos, and then they had permission to take a retest, a completely different test. But that allowed that teacher the opportunity to have the student do some sort of, relearning things they obviously missed, fill in some holes, and it put it on the student. It allowed the teacher to continue teaching, and obviously, with recorded videos like that, they used them for years. I mean, some of these videos were on the old side, but they were good, and they were quick, and they were easy, and they worked really well. And what was so amazing that I saw compared to some of the other classrooms is, that first test and that, those kids didn't maybe do well on it, or certain kids didn't do well on it. But then if they had to go through all these different things and then the retest, they did a whole lot better on that next test because he was essentially training them. And I think that's an important thing. And what you see a lot of times is students won't take dual credit courses. And they won't take dual credit courses if you ask them. It's not because, oh my gosh, this is so scary and I'm not going to do well. Because these same kind of students would take AP courses, but they don't take dual credit because they know that dual credit teacher, because they're trying to simulate that college environment, won't give retakes and won't let them do redos. And that is a shocking thing. My thing is if we don't make high schools a little bit more like college, we are really pushing on students that are going to struggle. It's like my junior high teachers used to always talk to the elementary teachers like, hey, you're really going to have to get these skills going, so I'll be ready to teach these guys in junior high. And it's just like junior or high school teachers telling junior high teachers, hey, I really need you to push kids here. Well, those college professors don't really have the opportunity to dialogue with those high school teachers, but I think that message would be the same of, hey, let's get them ready for a little bit more college-like atmosphere if possible. So, all right, I think the bottom line is with grade inflation is giving grades that are maybe considered lower isn't harsh, it's being truthful. I think that's really what it comes down to. So that is our show, and that is, my thoughts on absenteeism. That's my thoughts on compulsory attendance. That's my thoughts on grade inflation. I hope you guys enjoyed it today. Please, please, please give me those comments. Give me those suggestions. Email us any great guests you have on, and I really appreciate you joining me. Megan, I appreciate you keeping me in line today.
Thank you for having me, as usual.
Awesome. All right, guys, until next time, thank you very much. The opinions expressed by our guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views from Classroom to Campus, UWorld, or its affiliates. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating that really helps us out. Thank you so much.